exercise, which might recall some other older films, even in the dialogue. They talk about Bogart and so forth. Yeah. But that wasn't part of your necessarily part of your preparation for this film.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I didn't want to be doing an imitation of anybody. I didn't see what, that would help the film really. I thought it was more important to think about why he was the way he was. I mean, it's interesting because it is a genre. It's an issue of genre, the detective story. But one of my favorite writers, the playwright Eugene Ionesco, or Ionesco, however you say it. But he wrote a play called Victims of Duty, and there's a detective in that play. And it's something I thought about a lot when we were doing this movie, because at one point the detective in Victims of Duty turns to the main character and says, well, didn't you know every story is a detective story? There's no story that isn't a detective story. There's always a detective who's looking for something, and I just kind of looked at it that way, less as a genre picture and more just what is this guy actually looking for, what has he lost, and can he find something to replace it.
I think it really pays off because the movie has a really unique feel. And Mollie, I think your work in setting the pacing for the film really does a lot to it. It recalls these films and maybe the style of the dialogue. It says a certain pattern in certain scenes, but overall the movie has a real kind of quietly mournful tone to it. And it doesn't, it's not always about bringing, although it does have quite a few laughs in it too, it's not always about bringing attention to either the genre conventions or even the immediate details of the plot. It's a film that really allows an audience to find its way in it, and I really appreciate that gesture from both of you as artists. So I guess my question to you is, how about for you? Was it important that you look at other films? I know you've studied some film in the past.
It was, well, Noah and I had always talked about noir. Like I edited the film he did before this, and we had always, you sit around in the edit room and talk about your favorite films. So we had always sort of talked about how much we loved noir, and I think a lot of that language was just ingrained in us, so we didn't have to think about that so much in the editing. And the real challenge of cutting this movie was how to keep that tone and that kind of like dreamy quality, but also keep you engaged and keep the story moving forward. And it may not feel like it, but this is compared to our early cuts, this is a short and fast version of this movie. It's a long process, and balancing that slowness and the beauty with the move forward momentum was really took a lot. It's really hard.
There are a couple of scenes that I think that stand out overall from the tone. They actually fit in nicely, but and certainly help to propel the story. The first is your scene with the cell phone salesman, which I gathered just by watching it that it wasn't as heavily scripted as the other scenes, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was improvised. It was just in the script. It was Rosso buys a cell phone. That's all that was there.
And that guy was the locations manager or something. He was a crew member who just started doing this shtick.
He's terrific.
That I thought was funny. And we had a very long version, and we had a very short version
of that scene. You mean?
Of that scene.
Yeah.
We were trying to balance the humor versus why are we spending time in this cell phone store?
Well, it gets out right when you want it to. I need a phone that takes pictures. Boom,
yes.
You're out. The other scene is the scene in the where Rosso gets in the back seat of the Fed's car. Now this stands out, I think, to the rest of the film in being very kind of almost comically paced with the exchange of dialogue, and also in the cutting too as well. There's a lot of individual close-ups, and so maybe I could just talk to each about your approach to that specific scene.
Well, yeah, that whole subplot was. It was kind of tricky. I mean, for Noah, because it definitely has. I was thinking that tonight. I was like, it almost feels like that movie. Was it Bogdanovich who made that movie with all the teenagers in it, like Jodie Foster and or not Bogdanovich, but they're acting like grown-ups.
Oh, Bugsy Malone, you mean?
Yeah, the Bugsy Malone movie. It feels like Bugsy Malone a little bit. It feels like we're all like little kids pretending to be
a PI and two feds.
Yeah,
you mean?
and it is very different. It also has very different music. It's scored by that Stravinsky.
Right, The Rite of Spring.
Yeah, which is, I think, affects the editing somewhat.
Sure.
And there used to be more of that. There used to be, I mean, like Mollie says, there used to be a lot more of everything that maybe would make it seem less kind of random. But I don't know. Maybe you should talk more.
I mean, we struggled a lot with that scene, and we took it out, and we put it in, we took it out and put it in, and it is also, it's cut very differently. I mean, we sort of decided, well, if it's going to feel different, let's make it really different. So we decided to cut it with a very snappy, and I have to say it's the one scene, this is one of the few movies I've done that I can watch over and over again. Like, it's often I can't, and I just like you watch them thousands of times in the edit room, but this movie I love, but that scene, like, I don't know, I don't think we solved it. I don't think we ever got it exactly right. And at the end of the day, Noah and I are just sitting in the edit room being like, do we leave them in or do we take it out? And the scenes really sticks out of the movie, but this sort of through line that is being followed by the cops is important. And at the end of the day, I think we left it in just so we could have the joke with the glow-in-the-dark sunglasses. Because that is, I think, is one of my favorite jokes in the movie.
Well, I think the scene works. It's just that it more so than any of the other scenes in the films, it really kind of calls attention to the genre conventions of the smart patter and the cutting, I think, does that. Whereas most of the time, we're allowed to kind of step back from the action and watch it from a distance in longer takes and wider shots, and it's very arresting. It certainly makes you brings your attention to it.
Yeah.
So I had a very specific question. Oh, I wanted to ask you about the music for the film. You talked about Rite of Spring, and were you involved at all in any suggestions for that?
No, not at all. No, and Noah knew before he even made the movie what songs he wanted where. Some of them are actually written into the screenplay.
He came into the edit room with a CD, and it was funny because then the music supervisor needed the tracks from me, and I was like, well, it's Noah CD 1 and Noah CD 2. But I think the music was really key in conceptualizing a lot of the scenes, and there were a couple of scenes we laid in the music and then we cut to that, which you don't usually do. But like the one with the glow-in-the-dark sunglasses was an example of a scene where he just came in. He said, from this bar to this bar, I want to be here, and then from here to here, I want to see the car going here, and then a lot of that would be too long, and then we'd figure out how to cut it down. But we'd had a lot of trauma on Neil Cassidy, which was the movie I did know before this, with music that we then couldn't afford to buy the rights to. Yeah. So he had researched a lot of this stuff beforehand and made sure we could clear it, and then really conceived the scenes with these songs in mind.
Mollie, you said you had no trouble watching this over and over again. And Mike, you watched the film tonight, too, and apparently you're not one of those actors who has trouble watching your own performances.
Yeah, well, I just like to watch the movie because I like to think about it. I mean, I'm not even really interested in what I'm doing per se. I just think it's really fascinating. I mean, one of the reasons I did the movie is because I just had never read anything like it before, and as much as it's maybe an ode to certain films before it, it was just really unique. And every time I watch it, I just keep thinking about. It's a film that for a long time seems to be pretty simple, and then all of a sudden becomes very complicated, like in the span of 2 minutes, and then you're like, whoa, gee, what the hell? And then it just, you spiral off and think about it. So I like to watch it from the beginning, knowing what's going to happen at the end, trying to think about it.
I mean,